Hey gang, it's your boy Platt here with another Spirit Series video. Today I'm going to talk about specifically, Tennessee whiskey. The simplest way to look at Tennessee whiskey is it's straight whiskey that is made in Tennessee. However, though, it's a little more complicated than that. Internationally, or in some international agreements, Tennessee whiskey is viewed as bourbon, which seems kind of odd. And the reason that is, though, is that for the most part, Tennessee whiskey is produced just like bourbon. They're both corn-based, or at least 51% corn-based. They're both distilled at a certain proof. They're both barreled at a certain proof. And they both are aged in new oak barrels. What's the difference? Well, Tennessee whiskey uses something called the Lincoln County process. Lincoln County is a county in Tennessee. And we will go over the Lincoln County process a little bit later. The most popular of Tennessee whiskeys, of course, is Jack Daniel's Tennessee whiskey. Might be the most popular whiskey in America, but it's definitely the most popular Tennessee whiskey. However, there are other brands out there. Probably the one you might have heard is George Dickel. That's another Tennessee whiskey owned by Diageo Brands, created in around 1964. In the last few years, with the kind of micro distillery revolution, there's been several more whiskey distilleries pop up in Tennessee that create a Tennessee style whiskey. There's Chattanooga Whiskey Company. There's Nelson's Greenbrier Distillery. There is Benjamin Pritchard's. There's a few others that have come along recently and made their own version of Tennessee whiskey. At the state or at the national and international level, like I said, international level, they kind of refer to it bourbon. Nationally, regulation-wise, there's not a real strict term of what that Tennessee whiskey means, besides more that, well, it's a straight whiskey that comes from Tennessee. It's at the state level they really kind of hammer down the process. And again, they declare that Tennessee whiskey has to use this Lincoln County process. But they also reinforce the bourbon laws. Tennessee whiskey cannot be distilled at higher than 160 proof, cannot go in the barrel higher than 125 proof. Again, has to be 51% corn, has to go in a new oak barrel, just like bourbon. So they're a similar product until they get to that Lincoln County process. Now, not all whiskeys made in Tennessee are Tennessee whiskeys. Again, there's some newer distilleries making some different products. Even companies like Jack Daniel's and George Dickel's have expanded their line to add things like rye whiskey and what have you, which again would not fit into that definition of bourbon or even Tennessee whiskey. Also, too, in the last few years, there's been a big push for the revitalization of moonshine, or legal moonshine. One of the big distilleries down there is Old Smoky, which makes a base corn whiskey or moonshine, but they're also big into the flavored moonshines, which were hot a few years back. If you've ever seen the TV show Moonshiners, there's a gentleman named Popcorn Sutton on it, who's since passed, but someone's taken his recipes and created a line of moonshine that's based in Tennessee. So again, those would not qualify as the Tennessee whiskey. So let's get to this Lincoln County process. What is it? Where did it come from? What does it do for the whiskey? Jack Daniel's was the first to use this method, and at the time he built his distillery, it was located within Lincoln County. Years later, they drew the county lines, and now Jack Daniel's is no longer in Lincoln County, but they still refer to it as the Lincoln County process. What the Lincoln County process is they take wood from sugar maple trees, and they come into two by two kind of long boards or stays, whatever term you want to use. And then they'll create a fire. They'll take some of the whiskey, unaged whiskey off the still, and soak the wood and then light it on fire to create charcoal. And then they'll grind down this charcoal to fine enough bits where they eventually put it into a 10-foot deep giant wooden barrel, and at the top of it they take the whiskey that comes off the still, which is basically glorified bourbon, and they'll drip it through this charcoal. You may or may not know charcoal is a great filter. A lot of water filters are charcoal filters. So they will filter the whiskey through X amount of feet of this sugar made from charcoal, and then out the end it comes out, drips out, and then they put it right to a barrel, a new oak barrel, just like bourbon. So basically, it's bourbon coming off the still, but they throw it through this Lincoln County process, then they put it back in a barrel like they would bourbon. Lincoln County process. Now, what is theorized, and what would be up to you, the drinker, is that coming off the still, going through this filtering, it kind of takes off some rough edges, kind of cleans it up, mellows it out. Some people will point out that since we don't distill bourbon as higher proof as you would vodka and neutral grain spirits, you're leaving some inefficiencies, some impurities, what have you. And they think this Lincoln County method, though, kind of takes care of that too. But they definitely feel it makes it a more mellow whiskey. Again, it'll be up for you to decide. The Tennessee whiskey we're going to try, of course, is Jack Daniel's Old No. 7 Tennessee Sour Mash Whiskey, 80 proof or 40% alcohol by volume. Couple of quick things on that bottle. Like I said, we said it's basically glorified bourbon, but they're calling it Tennessee whiskey. The term sour mash, that is something you'll also see on bourbon bottles, and so I thought it's perfect to discuss. What sour mash is they will take, when you produce a whiskey, bourbon, scotch, whatever, you have a grain bill, and you'll take that grain and you'll cook it, you'll heat it so you can convert the starches into sugar, and that helps you give something for fermentation to happen. Once you're done with the spent grain, it's very similar to the process in brewing. If you've ever done an all-grain brew or gone to a brewery and see how the process is, they cook those grains. Once they're done with the grains, most of the time brewers will give it to a local farmer to give to his animals. It still has nutritional value as far as that goes. We've just taken a lot of the sugar out. In sour mashing, what they do is they'll take a little bit of that spent grain from the batch they just finished up, and they'll put it in with the new grain for the next batch. Now, the theory behind this is it brings continuity and consistency across the batches. They also think it's good for the mash pH on that next batch. If you're a hardcore home brewer and know things like about mash pH and stuff like that, you know that is an important little technical nuance in brewing. And again, they think the sour mash or the spent grains from the previous batch going in that next one helps with that mash pH, thus producing a better fermentable liquid. Also, another thing on there is the Old No. 7. Now, there's a lot of stories out there you may find out what that Old No. 7 means. Is it Jack Daniels had 7 wives, or was it the 7th grain bill or recipe he tried they finally made? Actually, what the Old No. 7 refers to is when Jack created the distillery. Back in those days, there weren't fancy labels or even the bottling we do today or whatever, and a lot of the whiskey was just sold in barrels. And the feds, the federal government would stamp on the barrels. They had a numbering system. There was like X districts, and inside each district there was X distilleries, and each distillery had a number. Well, Jack's number was No. 7 in that district. Well, a few years later, the federal government realigned the districts or whatever and changed his number. But people knew his Jack Daniels, knew that barrel by that No. 7. So he decided, even though his distillery number had changed, he was still going to keep putting that No. 7 or Old No. 7 on that barrel to let people know that that was his, because he felt he had developed the brand name or consciousness of Old No. 7. So that is the story behind that. Let's try a little Jack Daniels. Give her a little nose. Oh, that smells like happiness. Oh, and that tastes like happiness. Oh, that's good stuff. Full disclosure, Jack Daniels, I love the stuff. There's plenty of sweetness on this. It is a smooth whiskey. I do get enough rye bite in this that, again, it offers something different than just straight sweet. A good comparison or contrast comparison is, have you ever had Maker's Mark? Maker's Mark will throw in wheat instead of rye, or they use wheat, which is just a little softer taste. A lot of people like that. I do like a little rye in my bourbons, and again in here, there's just enough of that to get that little bite that, hey, I'm really drinking something. I've got something there, and I like Jack for that. But it's just a great, mellow, good whiskey that gets your attention. And I need another sip. Well, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please subscribe down below. Also, please like the video because it lets YouTube know we're putting out good content. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please leave them in the comment section, or you can always contact me on the Twitter page. Till next time, bottoms up.